change. So, and now I welcome the Tibetan Lama, His Eminence Mr. Kirti Rinpoche. He is an internationally known Tibetan Lama who is also the head of the Kirti Monastery administrations. I think you have a long-standing how can I say, recognition, and you are one of the authorities of the Tibetan community. So, welcome. Good to see you. In the Parliament, in different resolutions, but also when we had meetings on the situation in China, we regularly focus on the situation of the Tibetans. And during the last 2 years, more than 100 Tibetans have set themselves on fire. Regrettably, most of these self-immolations resulted in death. Many among the Tibetans setting themselves on fire in public were Buddhist monks, nuns, but there were also farmers and nomads, as well as many young Tibetans, very often even teenagers. The self-immolations have taken place in various areas inside Tibet and even beyond, including among Tibetans in exile. And a very large number of the cases have happened around the Kirti Monastery and in the neighboring area. The often repeated claim by the government has been that these are isolated incidents and that they are incited by separatists. These are the, I quote, comments from the Chinese government, and they are from outside Tibet. In the past few months, Chinese courts have carried out a number of swift trials related to the self-immolations and sentenced a Tibetan monk to death with a 2-year reprieve and several others to lengthy jail terms on charges of incitement. The last such court ruling took place on Sunday, 2nd of March, when 3 Tibetans were sentenced for up to 15 years for their crimes relating to ongoing wave of self-immolations. So this is a little bit the background, and I would like now to invite His Eminence Kirti Rinpoche to give a statement to us on the human rights situation there. Thank you. So we will have the presentation from Tibetan into English, and this will then be translated.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Before we begin, if you allow me, I would just like to explain how we will proceed. So first of all, His Eminence Kirti Rinpoche will introduce himself to the Parliament, and then afterwards, which will be of course translated, and then afterwards I'll read out his statement, which I believe has been made available to you, and which will be followed by a few remarks by Kirti Rinpoche, and then the exchange of views can take place. Thank you.
member number Linjila and Tomar, some they are the numbers of Nala, share Kokabna, the Latushi.
First of all, I'd like to thank the Subcommittee on Human Rights in the European Parliament for giving me this opportunity to express my views on the situation inside Tibet. I'd like to apologize because as I don't speak English, my statement and everything I say has to be translated into English, which will be time consuming, so I'd like to apologize in advance. As said by Madam Chair in the introductory speech, so my name is Kirti Rinpoche. I'm the 11th reincarnation of Kirti Rinpoche, and I'm from the Ngaba region of Tibet.
아니 나야 자가도 용해때 납좀나 길로로 텐당고 자가스 용이 아니 장을로라 벌어야 진짜 딱고 텐지로이
I came into exile in 1959, and then I had the opportunity to visit Tibet once in 1985.
단다 라니미시 종사기 사실 좋은데 나 그때 공부했다 나비 사고도 시작돼요.
As you all know, the Ngaba area in Tibet has witnessed the highest number of self-immolations so far.
제상 단단한 수 시바다 제이나 단다바다 랑데메사 당에도 자다dwi 저도요.
So as far as we know, as of today, there has been 107 instances of self-immolation in Tibet.
되게 야나게 보통은 비수주의 농주진 수주의 랑에 따라서 되네 정도의 지를.
So these self-immolations took place because of the failed and repressive policies waged by the Chinese authorities in the entire Tibetan plateau.
제상 단단 리콜딩이야 인슈때 네 신안에 뒤서는 뭔고서 인지나서 로나 로나시위.
So I have a statement to the European Parliament that I would like my translator to read, so that we'll save some time. So here is the statement. Tibet was an independent nation until 1959, and this historical fact cannot be distorted. Tibet, also known as the Third Pole, is the roof of the world and source of all the major rivers in Southeast Asia. For centuries, Tibet served as a peace zone and maintained peaceful relationship of kinship and priest pattern with its neighboring countries. However, I have a special relationship with Ngaba in Amdo province of Tibet, which is my native land and where the first self-immolation took place in 2009. Three generations of people of Ngaba have undergone unbearable repression since 1935, when the Red Army, led by Mao Zedong, on the long march entered Tibet through Ngaba. The Chinese government has deepened the wounds in the hearts of Tibetans. During the peaceful protest of people in Ngaba in 2008, the Chinese security forces opened fire on Tibetans, killing and injuring many of the Tibetan protesters. Moreover, the Kirti monastery was virtually turned into a prison twice, with all the monks held as prisoners. The continued subjugation and severe suppression at the time triggered the current crisis in Tibet. As a result of Chinese occupation, Tibetan identity, religion, and culture is now on the verge of extinction. The 4 generations of Chinese leadership denied Tibetan people with basic human rights and instead adopted the following policies to annihilate the Tibetan identity. The policy of rampant destruction of Tibetan fragile ecology, also known as the Third Pole. The policy of degeneration of the growth of Tibetan population by birth control. The policy of raising the mortality rate among Tibetans by denying basic healthcare facilities. The policy of transforming Tibetans into a minority in their own land by population transfer. The policy of constantly shrinking habitation space for Tibetans. The policy of complete destruction of unique religion and cultural heritage of Tibet. The policy of complete destruction of Tibetan language, which is the soul of Tibetan culture. The policy of foreseeable transformation of Tibetan tradition and way of life. The policy of transforming Tibetans into servitude under the dogma of Han superiority. The policy of inequality between Chinese and the Tibetans before the court of law. The policy of inequality between Chinese and the Tibetans for employment and recognition. the policy of inequality between Chinese and Tibetans for economic opportunities, the policy of false promises in the name of development and benefits to Tibetans. It is because of the implementation of these repressive policies in Tibetan areas that Tibetans in all 3 provinces have lost faith in Chinese authorities and are left with no choice but to resort to self-immolation. From what we know, so far 107 Tibetans have self-immolated, and they have called for the return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Tibet and freedom for Tibetans. This is the aspiration of 6 million Tibetans living in and outside Tibet. These 107 Tibetans have not uttered a single harsh word, let alone acted violently. But the Chinese government has consistently condemned them as acts of madness, separatists, and terrorists. The self-immolators who have survived have been taken away into Chinese custody under the pretext of medication and are mercilessly beaten to death. The Chinese authorities are not able to hand over the bodies of the self-immolators to the family members because they have mutilated them. Only their ashes are returned. The Chinese authorities have acted like barbarians by blaming the family members and the so-called Dalai clique for instigating self-immolation. The family members are arrested and severely tortured to confess their involvement in the self-immolation. The Ngaba Intermediate People's Court on 31st January 2013 had meted out death sentence with 2 years reprieve to Lobsang Kunchok and stripped him of his political rights for the rest of his life. The same court sentenced Lobsang Tsiring to 10 years in prison and stripped him of his political rights for 3 years. On the same day, the Sangchu People's Court in Gansu province sentenced 6 Tibetans, including Pema Thundu, to 3 to 12 years in prison, following which the government spokesperson in Beijing and state media immediately announced that they have got sufficient evidence. However, the testimonies of Lobsang Kunchok and Lobsang Tsiring in Tibetan language, it should be, does not match, not contradicted in the statement, with the Chinese version, which was shown on CCTV to the outside world. It clearly shows that the evidences against the Tibetan prisoners are fabricated. The family members of the self-immolators are also sentenced on the basis of fabricated evidences and denied legal representation. I therefore appeal to the international community to urgently take an action to save these Tibetans who are prosecuted without any evidence of wrongdoing. As there is a saying in Tibetan that deer is the target of arrow, whether it is standing or lying down. Similarly, in front of the Chinese government, Tibetan people and its religion and culture are the object of disregard and suppression, irrespective of whether it is at fault or not. With the Chinese government's policy of population transfer and irreparable environmental destruction in Tibet, today many Asian countries, and particularly Tibet's neighboring countries such as India, Nepal, China, Bhutan, Burma, and Thailand are at risk of serious repercussion. The rapid melting of Tibet's glaciers will have adverse impact on the livelihoods of thousands of farmers and nomads living in the neighboring countries. The construction of dams on delicate Himalayan ranges will deplete the flow of rivers originating from Tibet, such as River Ganges, which will adversely affect lives of millions of lives in downstream countries. Tibet's northern plains, Changdang, have become a restricted area for the past 60 years, because of which it is difficult to know how many military bases and secret airfields have been set up in these areas. The Chinese government is carrying out large-scale military activities and set up destructive weapons in the Indo-Tibetan border areas and pastoral region of Changdang, posing serious threat to neighboring countries. Therefore, the world has the responsibility to stop militarization of Tibet so as to ensure peace and stability. The time has come for the European Parliament to put a meaningful pressure on the Chinese government to accept the following proposals to resolve the crisis in Tibet. The European Parliament should pass a resolution in support of the genuine aspirations of the Tibetans, both in and outside Tibet, for the return of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to Tibet and freedom for Tibetans. There must be an immediate end to the repressive policies and withdrawal of the security forces from the Tibetan areas, which are the root causes leading to tragic self-immolations by Tibetans. All those Tibetans who are suffering imprisonment under false charges for their alleged role in this must be immediately released. Respecting the international norms, the Chinese government must compensate those Tibetans executed in prison, killed or injured in police firing, and the political prisoners who have suffered physical and mental torture in the prison. The European Parliament must urge the Chinese government to provide the United Nations and the European Parliament and other independent fact-finding organizations and the media unfettered access into Tibetan areas to assess the real situation and conditions of Tibetans. These 4 points are the genuine aspirations of the Tibetan people. I'm submitting this to you with a fervent hope that the European Parliament will urgently act on our 4-point appeal to bring an immediate resolution to the crisis in Tibet.
Tanda numbers Ganga Burgi Nedanga Tola numbers Pati Shiba Chengi or Tanda Dinana Shushate, that's what the Garancha.
I'm sure you are very much well aware of the situation inside Tibet, and everything I've said in my statement is the real situation inside Tibet currently.
Puenala, Ramli Mesa, Jada Jimmy Dun, that is a massive, that Susu Ransi Javata, Ane China Chumba, Ane Ningi, Ning Nan, Ken Shua last quarter, Regi. 담라데 원에 시와다 데 시작 몰심보지 요아래 등아주 시트부요 말에
Like I've said in the statement, as far as we know, there have been 107 instances of self-immolations, but owing to the oppression waged in the entire Tibetan plateau in Tibet, there have been other cases where people have people committed suicide, and where people just could not take the repressive policies and that they jumped into rivers. And so, in this way, many more Tibetans have died due to the repressive policies of the Chinese government. Tibetan people inside Tibet are prosecuted without legal representation and on fabricated evidence.
Shikala Yupati in the Yarumbushina water, Tagana the Tana, Nalas Waya, Detanjo Yusin, was a Jinju.
The Chinese government says that the self-immolations that have taken place inside Tibet have been incited by the Tibetans outside Tibet, including Kirti Rinpoche.
Jana Shungu Kitcha, Gene, you Kitcha Sawan in Shegi Omar, Genember.
The Chinese government makes statement without any basis.
Number the Chengi in a Piju Shisha Shuina, Janaga Silunge, Tendegi Panta, Imbi Panta, Chata we use in the share and the Panta Tan.
I'm sure all of you are aware that the Chinese Prime Minister once made a statement where he said that they had ironclad proof that the self-immolations or any other activities inside Tibet were incited by Tibetans outside Tibet.
CCTV 거기서 가르쳐서 내 ngo주지요가라 나 대선 가능 진영화지를 시에요. 그러니까 대선 가능 지요 말을 나 보여준 게 지등 가능 진영화를 지요. 지등 가능.
So the Chinese government made allegations saying that I am involved in the self-immolations, but I mean just on the basis that Rinpoche had once met the Minister for the Department of Security, which is not true because Rinpoche was one of the ministers of the Central Tibetan Administration for Religion and Culture.
대단 대신게 다 용조 가서 겐렘밖에 제시해요 말에.
So the Chinese government should make statements that can, I mean, with claims that which can be backed up with proof.
다디살라 개치시대 변나 메라당에게 변자당 예사당 되게 용조 재미 춤지만 보시지가 되게 돼서라 아니 재미지 무슨 지기어를 때 녀도 주베데 개치시시작도.
So nowadays the Chinese government are persecuting the families and friends of those who self-immolated. So they are basically playing with the lives of the families and friends of the self-immolators.
Yeah.
Mr. Rinpoche, I would prefer that we proceed like this. I ask the members for questions and statements, and then you respond. And because we have to.
Okay?
So now, who wants the floor? I have on my list already Mr. Ruata, Mr. Donskis, other colleagues. Okay, then Mr. Ruata.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chair.
In French? Yes, I do.
Okay.
Yes, okay. Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Chair. I have a couple of questions, but before that I'd like to say to our friends that the European Parliament is tackling this problem. Next week in Strasbourg, we've tabled a report for discussion on relationships between China and the EU. I have personally tabled amendments calling upon the Chinese authorities to respect the rights of the Tibetan population. And I am convinced that our chair of the Subcommittee of Human Rights in the Parliament will do her level best to ensure progress is made. You can be sure of that. My question is that tomorrow, the 8th of March, is International Women's Day. I have seen in the press that Tibetan women are often subject to forced marriages with Chinese men. Can you confirm this? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now Mr. Donskis.
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. It's not a question, but a very short comment that I would like to make. So, first and foremost, I wanted to thank His Eminence for his statement. And as a Lithuanian, I want just...
I think it needs time for translation.
Of course.
Okay. So you take
and as a Lithuanian myself, I want to remind one thing. In Central and Eastern Europe, we knew a series of tragedies which we knew as a series of self-immolations in Czechoslovakia and Lithuania. And that was from 1968 onward. And everything started with a young Palach, a Czech man who burned himself alive. And this dealt a blow to the political and moral reputation of the Soviet Union, because that came as an eye-opener, even to the most naive people in Western Europe and elsewhere. In Lithuania, we were a similar case when a young man burned himself alive in 1972, Romas Kalanta, and that caused an uprising of young people in Kaunas, Lithuania, which was brutally suppressed by the Soviet regime. Here we have a dramatically and tragically increasing number of self-immolations, more than 100. And I have to say that Tibet, appears as a long-standing moral examination of the world. It's an ethical examination of our sensitivity and our sense of reality and our values. On the very final note, I just wanted to say that I'm not getting sentimental. I'm just trying to remember of our moral duty to react as a democratic entity to what is simply unacceptable. That a stateless culture with its unique culture should be threatened only because it wants to profess its unique culture and to exist. There was a very grim saying in the former Soviet Union where I grew up, and the saying was that the death of one person is a tragedy. The death of 1 million is statistics. I'm just afraid that the increasing number can play a very negative role, allowing us to get desensitized by statistics. It's a tragedy, it's not statistics, and we have to react properly and immediately. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Donskis. Frau Lichtenberger.
Ja, herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much indeed for your presentation.
So I can talk English too, then it's easier, no problem. Thank you very much for your report from inside Tibet and the evidence you gave us about the very bad situation there. And as a member of the China delegation, I have been in Tibet years ago, and we saw the situation even in spite of the fact that, of course, the Chinese officials tried to show us the very nice sides of Tibet, mainly. But my question is, we have a Chinese constitution that would guarantee autonomous rights to the people in Tibet, be it the right to education, be it the right to their language, be it the right to living their cultural lives, their cultural habits and so on. What I learned is that even there the situation is worsening. Can you please tell us a little bit more, because I'm very interested also in the issues of schooling and how the education between learning the Chinese language, the Tibetan language, learning about the own culture is developing right now, because this is touching upon a big part of Tibetan population, which is tragic. And the second part is, second question also, we hear about forced settlements for nomads, even more. And this brings about also radical changes in the way that farming is done and the use of the land is done, and so also the fundamentals of life would be destroyed on the Tibetan plateau if it is used in a, let's say, more Western way in intensifying the cattle, numbers of cattle per kilometer and so on. So can you also please tell us a bit about that and about how these settlements, these forced settlements of nomads are going on? And you also were talking about the building of dams and the building of constructions, and there's as far as I learned, the plan to change one river that should go to the north, which would then, of course, have a major impact on the basics of life in Tibet. Thank you very much, and I hope that we as Europeans can really help to improve the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva Lichtenberger. And now I give the floor to the EAS, to Madame Joëlle Yvonnet.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for giving me the floor. In June last year, High Representative Ashton addressed the European Parliament on the situation in Tibet. She stressed the EU's concern over the deterioration of the situation in Tibet, and in particular self-immolations, mass arrests and detentions in the Tibetan Autonomous Region following self-immolations in Lhasa, and reports that the Tibetan Autonomous Region had been closed to foreigners. Since then, we have witnessed a further deterioration, such as the ever-increasing number of Tibetans committing self-immolation, many of them young people, a worrying trend that prompted the High Representative to issue a statement last December where she expressed our profound sadness. The High Representative also, in the same statement, reiterated EU concerns over the restrictions imposed by the Chinese authorities on expressions of Tibetan identity, which appear to be giving rise to a surge of discontent in the region. She then called upon the Chinese authorities to address the deep-rooted causes of the frustration of the Tibetan people and ensure that their civil, political, economic, and social and cultural rights are respected, including their right to enjoy their own culture, to practice their own religion, and to use their own language. Finally, the High Representative called upon the Chinese authorities to release all individuals detained for taking part in peaceful demonstrations, allow free access to all Tibetan autonomous regions, and on Tibetans themselves to refrain from resorting to extreme forms of protest, such as self-immolation, and on their community and religious leaders to use their influence to help stop this tragic loss of life. Far from improving, the situation has continued to deteriorate since the end of last year. Over 100 immolations have happened since 2011. Incitement to immolation has now been criminalized. The EU has noted with concern reports of the long prison sentences imposed on families and associates of persons who have committed self-immolation, as well as on persons participating in protest, and that the number of trials of persons for incitement appear to be increasing. The EU regularly raises the issue of the situation in Tibet bilaterally, as was the case during the last EU-China summit in September last year, or the Human Rights Dialogue, and in appropriate UN fora, such as the General Assembly or the Human Rights Council. And the EU will continue to monitor the situation and raise its concern with the Chinese government as appropriate. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madame Yvonne. And now I would ask Monsieur Rinpoche to answer, but I have to ask you only to answer the specific questions because we are really running out of time. Please.
도나지 시우지나지 때나데 두지시 아니 저담부들라 법바다 재미 무색이 창제게 찍지 원신 창제게 찍을 세때 단다 무색이나 서우시에게메 나나모 법바다 재미 창제게발라 아니 머리 튼지게 때다 좀 머리 튼지게 사상생 튼지게 수주기 돈에 아니 계산세라서 튼지 정도지 세도
Merci de votre intérêt.
Thank you very much indeed for your interest in the Tibetan situation. To reply to Mr. Rawata's question, I'd just like to say I have no detailed information about this matter, but marriage between Tibetan women or Chinese men or vice versa is always carried out with the agreement of both sides. Bearing in mind that Tibet is closed to foreigners, as it were, people from the outside, therefore we do have problems when it comes to getting the necessary information. It may well be that there have been situations much like the one you described.
And now to answer the second question on the Tibetan language, I'd like to say that the Tibetan language is on the verge of extinction at this time. So the situation is so urgent now that a Tibetan, if he wants to go and buy something from the market, he cannot do it without a translator to translate whatever he needs into Chinese. And all the administrative works are carried out in Chinese. So now Tibetan is taught in the Tibetan schools inside Tibet just as a language. All the other subjects are taught in Chinese. So, as the Tibetan language is on the verge of extinction, it is the responsibility of the international community to help preserve the Tibetan language. Now coming to the displacement of the nomads, the Tibetan nomads have been lived for centuries in Tibet, in different locations, and they have never lived in in one location. All of them have been dispersed. So now the lands of the nomads are being confiscated in the name of environmental protection. And the others and the other nomads are asked to live in communities. So in this way, or this is another way to displace the nomads. Actually, the Chinese government is carrying out this policy to shrink the habitation space for Tibetans. So we have made a book available to the public here. In that book, I have mentioned all the 13 policies, and I've also given examples to elaborate these repressive policies.
Yeah. And the Jixu Corte, Jixu Corte, Pernala, Sani Hogichu, Nubladea, Nukulo, Polandea, that the nation of Peter Conjo, Majung Chashikochi, Pernanga, Ruta, Noa, the Gangatum, Tusin, Rodeo Indi, and the Pernala, that Junshim was shooting we are Janala. So
So the rivers are now, rivers flowing to the south originally are being diverted towards the north, and those flowing towards the north are being diverted to the south. So this has an enormous repercussion on the environment inside Tibet.
아니 내가 나신 게다 보이는 게추 망부지라 다 치라잡지. 아니 자가다 다 침지 이거 망부지라 다 망보나 강에 침부 슈치지 임바데 땡케 쳐도요.
And now many dams are being built on the Tibetan rivers, so which in a couple of years will have irreparable repercussion on the countries, on the neighboring countries.
아니 단단 넘버스 송가라 이럴 주소네 베기도나 나시 진의 송화다 아니 내가 나신 게 지마이나 까나지 임바다 되게 용서가서 범미 용서게 고개요라 아니 아주 갈래갈래 지치 보나 땡이 범미 용서게 준비 고용 거야 고용데 미 용서게 심나는 나수지 계기도 단 넘버스 송화자 마임비 라랭 돌아가지 따투위에 메테 계신 부시샤거든.
So everything that is being done in the European Parliament, the Tibetan people are aware of it, and slowly, step by step, the Tibetan people inside Tibet will also come to know of it. And everything you have said here, we are very grateful for everything you have done so far, and we would be even more grateful if everything that is said here can be transformed into action. So the crisis inside Tibet is very urgent, so it demands for an immediate action.
So thank you very much. I think it was very impressive. And what we can do, we try to do in the Parliament. And as Mr. Rota has pointed out, we will have an ongoing report. We are having an ongoing report on China with several paragraphs on the human rights violations against the Tibetans. And I'm sure we will continue to follow also individual cases as much as we can. So thank you again for coming and for translating.
You're welcome.